is not as expensive. It is not as significantly large. It still is a ventilator, but it is really, really nice. The key to it, that lung protective strategy, because it gives little teeny, super fast tidal volumes. So the whole cycle of each and every breath, am I good?
You look good.
Okay. The whole cycle of the entire breath is active. So, you know, when we breathe, we have an active pull in and then we have a passive release. With high frequency, the entire breath cycle is active. So you can breathe right around it. And at first when you think about that, how in the world am I going to breathe around something coming at me? But because it's so fast and it is so small, you're not fighting that. You're not fighting it. Not like when you have the conventional mechanical ventilation where it's whoosh, big breath in. Try to breathe against that. It's very tough, okay? This is just constantly right here, and you can breathe right around it. So we don't often in the world of neonates have to sedate these babies, and that's kind of a bonus. Little ones are going through enough. Their bodies are trying to fight for life. Their immune systems are weak. Their vessels are weak. And to give excessive things can be detrimental to their overall care, growth, and healing. So it's nice that we don't have to sedate them much. Pediatrics, we try to sedate them. Unfortunately, in pediatrics, we sedate them because they're so scared. And that scare presents for a lot of fighting against therapies. So we sedate them to calm them so that we can heal them. But it's always kind of a little tough to see a little pediatric patient restrained and completely sedated. But just be aware, that's definitely where we're sedating them for their own safety too. The first thing they want to do is pull the tube out, and they are incredibly flexible. They can manipulate their body parts to get the tube out regardless of what you think they can't do. So, oscillator. So the 31, this is actually the 3100B. And you can notice the 3100B by this green strip at the bottom. So the B is for 35 kilograms of weight and greater. So this would be more of your late heavy pediatrics and adult version. But the setup looks similar. I'll show you, I'll give you the two nuances different. And that's kind of the reason why I gave you this little screen, this little sheet of paper. If you notice, it kind of looks a little bit like this front screen here. A little bit like this. So the 3100, that which we use in the small population under 35 kg, it has a very light blue strip down here at the bottom. Light blue strip, and it's an A, so 3100A. 3100A. So how I want you to look at oscillation. Oscillation can be divided into, like most mechanical ventilators, into two big categories: ventilation and oxygenation. And I kind of put them on here ready for you. This is a two-sided sheet. This has kind of some guidelines on the back where you can start. Every patient is unique and different. These are strictly guidelines. But if you had an ABG and you knew you had a ventilation issue and you wanted to manage CO2, you would come to what I would call the middle of the ventilator, So this particular window here is all about the piston. Behind here, if you remove this off, is the piston. So there's the piston, and you can see it moves, okay? So when the motor on this machine gets going, this is what's providing all that oscillatory effect for you. But that's the piston. Exactly, it's very much like acoustics. This fits on here nicely. This is all part of the circuit. This circuit is significantly large. If you think about this in terms of a micro preemie baby, good heavens, this is a fight. So one of the key things I'll share with you in setting up this ventilator is that, I'm trying not to get my backside of my,
It's okay.
is that you want to establish, that your baby, is set and stay and in one place. So you don't want to have your baby moving around. You are going to then, so think about the warmer being out here. You're going to have your baby in the warmer, and you're going to bring this to them. You're going to bring this to them. Now you're not going to connect this without this being also secured. So all four brakes on, this thing gets going, it will dance across the floor. Okay, it will. I've seen it do it. Sometimes if it's a pretty good sized pediatric, we'll put extra weights on the bottom because it does move. It has the ability. Those little brakes work great, but they're not 100%. So please make sure you use all four. This is one time where you want to use all four. So put all four of your brakes on. And then move this to the edge of your warmer, and I would say right about here. So your warmers, even if it's the giraffe, there's that barrier. Make that part this much go into the baby. Secure this section right here with some tape, with a clamp, something that's not going to occlude your tubing, something that's not going to allow this part to move anymore. Now you don't want it like this, okay? That's too high, but you also don't want it too low. This does have a drain capacity because there will be condensate because there is a humidification system, but you want it to be pretty level, pretty level. If you have it too low, then all the condensate's gonna drain into your baby. So you wanna make sure you avoid that too. Most of your warmers will have the ability to go up and down. That's why you wanna create as level as a playing arm as possible. Then you bring the baby to the end of this. This won't be moving, so if you have it secured here, this will not move. You bring the baby to here. Because if you try to work this and or not the baby, you're gonna end up extubating that kid. This circuit is too heavy to manage. So you wanna secure this circuit, bring the baby to this, secure your ET tube, and then just check, once you have it on, is that tube moving flexible enough or is there some tautness to it? Do not have any. Your baby will extubate. And these are usually pretty critically ill babies and you don't wanna have to go through the emergency resuscitation and or emergency re-intubation. So just kind of keep that in mind. You'll see that when you're in the NICUs, these circuits are very much secured to the warmer so that they don't move, and we manipulate the baby to the end of the circuit, okay? The other thing is, nurses are generally pretty scared of this ventilator, which is, you know, in our case, a good thing. But they still go and they try to change diapers, they try to manipulate their baby, they change IVs. And this ventilator is very sensitive. One of the reasons it's sensitive is we set the alarms to only be a two-point difference of anything. 2 points could just be a little, and this alarm will go off. So if they move the baby, it can set this ventilator off and then they start panicking. So whenever you have a baby on the oscillator, you're gonna wanna be in constant communication with the nurse. When are you gonna do something? When are you gonna do care? When are you gonna change a diaper? When are you gonna rotate the baby? And you wanna be there. It creates less stress for you and the nurse, okay? That's the whole key to that. All right, let's talk about the overall function, and then I'll go back about the circuit a little bit more. The overall function. So the middle of the ventilator is primarily for managing your ventilation or your CO2. Ventilation or CO2. This bar here is for the piston. You always kind of want it oscillating right kind of in the middle. If it starts oscillating on one side or the other, on the 3100A, which is not on this one, there's a little knob down here that allows you to dial in that piston to be right in the middle. Right in the middle. So if you start to see it wave one side to the other, use that little knob. I don't have it on here, but it's right here. Use that little knob to dial it back to where it's right in the middle. So that little oscillatory, it's a little red right there, back and forth, you want it to be in the middle. The reason you want it to be in the middle, if you work this piston too much, out of balance, and that's what that is, that's a balance, it's gonna overheat on you and it's gonna shut down. You don't want that to happen. I mean, we can all bag a baby, but ideally the baby should stay on this oscillator, okay? So ventilation-wise, power, and amplitude. This is power and amplitude. This is generally the very first setting that we're going to change on our ventilator to affect CO2. Power and amplitude. And it kind of works in the opposite of what we're used to. So when we think about right now, if I have a patient that has a high level of CO2, I want to increase the tidal volume, right? I want to increase the respiratory rate. I want to make them breathe faster. So you think, okay, I'm going to turn this up. In actuality, we're going to turn it down so we give a little bit more time for the gas to be in there. So we're going to slow down the oscillation distension. So it's a little bit different way of thinking, okay? And it's just this knob. These knobs are super sensitive, so you don't go and make big swings. These little teeny swings, little teeny ticks, and then you just lock it down there. That's one thing to always check when you are at the bedside with the baby. Make sure this is locked down, because it's so sensitive, someone could brush by this and change it if you didn't have it locked. So there's a little knob right here, and I'll let all of you come up here and mess with this, but you lock it down once you have it in there. So generally, amplitude is where we manage CO2. Eye time, we set it and leave it, 0.33 to 0.35. Set it and leave it. We generally, set it and forget it, yes, we generally do not mess with our eye time. Now hertz down here at the bottom, hertz, remember 1 hertz is 60 breaths, okay? So if I have 3 hertz, how many breaths? 180, that's a lot, right? But that's the whole principle of oscillation. A lot of little teeny breaths, okay? So amplitude, distension, hertz, kind of like frequency. We don't mess with this one a lot either unless we're really starting to get very high numbers or not effectiveness with amplitude. Then we might change our hertz numbers. Along with ventilation, way over here, which is kind of interesting that it's on the far side, is our bias flow. Bias flow. And bias flow is just flow. Think about flow. You need to have air in the circuit. You need to have gas moving in and out. Generally, we're somewhere between 4 and 12 on a pediatric neonatal patient. Adults will be much higher. But if you feel like that patient is really kind of still gasping a lot, then just turn up the flow. Turn up the flow. So that's another way we can do that. On the 3100A, there are 2 knobs here. 2 knobs. So one high, one low. This knob here actually relates to the oxygenation part of this ventilator. And this is the oxygenation part of the ventilator right here. PAW or MAP. PAW or MAP. So airway pressure or mean airway pressure. There's 2 ways we can affect FiO2 supplementation on the oscillator. Change my MAP and my PAW based on the high and the low. Generally, we set the low, we leave it, and we work with the high number. So it's an adjustment up and down. Think of this like your peak. Okay, think of this like your peak. Or I can dial in FiO2 supplementation on my blender. And there will always be a blender and a humidifier. Okay? So I can have 2 ways to adjust FiO2. So, go ahead, Dennis.
All right, this might be a stupid question.
Is
the whole point of this, like the ventilation side, just to keep all the alveoli open and keep the lungs open constantly?
So we want to have surface area so we can have good gas exchange, so yes. This is going to be more like PEEP, splinting them open. This is constant bathing inside of those open alveolar structures.
So when
Okay, so right now when we breathe, what do? This is my alveolar structure. Right? With oscillation, I'm right here. I never have any decompression, no de-recruitment, and no lack of gas in there.
Okay.
The gas is in there all the time. Inspiratory, expiratory, constant.
And that's the ventilation middle section, the amp power.
That's just for high frequency in general, whether it's high frequency oscillator, high frequency jet, or VDR.
And then another question: Why does this not work on ARDS patients so well?
It works great on ARDS patients as long as you're not an adult.
Yeah, that's
Oscillator has been researched and proven not to be effective on adults. Just doesn't work. VDR, get VDR in there. Same principle. This doesn't work so well.
I think you told us before, but what's the difference again between VDR and this?
The difference is the panel, but not much else.
Okay.
That's about it. It still is high frequency oscillation, little teeny volumes. Just different way of delivering it, that's all. But they use the VDR more in the adult world.
So how do we know when to switch over to this?
So in the world of neonates, this is typically our first go-to. We don't switch. Micro preemies, babies that have meconium aspiration, babies that are already in ARDS, babies that have some complication in the respiratory system, which is generally why a baby is in the NICU. You know, there are some babies that have other complications. But if they need to be mechanically ventilated or have ventilation, this is the preferred method. Lung protective strategy, nice small oscillatory volumes, no injury, no bear trauma, no volume trauma. So you will see these used a lot in your NICUs. Kaiser Roosevelt, UC Davis, Sutter downtown, okay? Oscillator for the baby. Oscillator for the baby. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead, Casey.
The same concept then with the jet?
Yes.
Okay, so.
Yes. The only difference with the jet is it's a more rapid stream of air, impulses versus oscillations. So if you were to look at the airflow, so oscillations I kind of think of like this. With jets, it's so the concept is the same, but it's not the oscillatory effect. It doesn't have a piston, it has a jet. Okay, anybody else?
As far as on the car, the map, is there like a minute or max on that you want it for?
Well, yes and no. Every baby's going to be different. So on the back of your sheet here, you guys, I kind of put down some rough guidelines. Not so much specific settings. Usually, so let's just take, for example, let's say I have a baby on ACPC, and I've got them on a pressure of 16, PEEP5, and an FiO2 of 60%. So on here, my oscillator, I'm going to set my amplitude in my paw, probably maybe 20, 22. Okay, so it's generally around 4 to 6 greater than. I'm going to set my paw usually somewhere between 5 and 8 above. So this will be a much bigger number than 5 PEEP. And then my FiO2 would still be 60. Now, you're like, okay, that's all great and wonderful, but how do I know it's working? On the bottom of your sheet, on the back side, I gave you this, we call it the chest wiggle. That's how we confirmatively assess that your baby is effectively being ventilated on oscillator. On a neonate, we're looking for the wiggle from the clavicle to the umbilicus. I should not see it down to the groin or down to the top of my thighs on a neonate. That's way too much amplitude. Back it off. And you're gonna know right away, because why? Generally, we're delivering somewhere between 4 and 8 hertz. So you're gonna know the moment you connect that baby and turn this thing on, you're gonna see the wiggle. And if that wiggle is too deep, back off that amplitude. Yeah, back off that amplitude, okay? So the wiggle is very key, very key. We rough estimate, and when I say rough, it's rough. Because I might only end up putting my amplitude at 18, that might be enough. You just don't know how it's gonna respond. Pediatric patients, it goes to the groin, clavicle to groin, and then for adults, clavicle to thigh, mid-thigh. Go ahead, Rachel.
So you said there the pressure is 16, so what would you set it to on here again?
Somewhere between 4 and 6 over.
Okay, and that's the bottom math. No, sorry, that's not the bottom math.
No, that's
The
amplitude, yes. And that's a rough estimate, you guys. I know you want black and white numbers. It's just not black and white. Okay? So I told you yesterday, the reason I'm giving you this is because I want to help you with the board. The board is not going to ask you to do initial settings. What the board is going to do is give you an ABG and hope that you can recognize that you have a CO2 problem, and what do you need to adjust? I need to adjust my amplitude and power, my eye time or my hertz. Done. Done. Okay, I'm not gonna mess with my paw, and I am not gonna mess with my FiO2. That is not gonna fix my ventilation. Now, flip that over, they give you an ABG that it's all oxygenation. Well then yes, let's mess with the paw and the map and the FiO2. Okay, that's the kind of questions they're gonna ask you. They might also ask you to calculate the number of cycles for an oscillator. Just know that each cycle is 60. So if it's 6, it's 360 cycles. Okay, does that make sense? Hertz, sorry. But it's
So what do
considered
you
cycles.
So what do you
Cycles. They flip back and forth. Cycles and hertz.
So each hertz or cycle is 60.
Here, I'm gonna write it down for you,
No,
okay?
I just wanted to.
Hertz equals 1 cycle, which equals 60 cycles breaths. Cycles and breaths. So if I had a baby on, like I said, 3 hertz, it'd be 180 cycles or breaths.
We don't get calculators anymore.
Nope, it's all paper. There are no calculators. Okay?